Tombstone, Arizona. October 26, 1881, just before 3 in the afternoon. 9 men stand in a dirt lot about 18 feet wide. Some of them are 6 feet apart, close enough to touch. Somebody's revolver clears leather, and for the next 30 seconds the air turns to smoke and lead. 30 shots. 3 men dying in the dust. You know this fight. You've seen it in a dozen movies. It's the most famous gunfight in American history, and almost everything you know about it is wrong. It didn't happen at high noon, and here's the part that surprises everyone. It didn't even happen at the OK Corral. If Hollywood got the location wrong, the time wrong, and, as you'll see, maybe even who was armed, what else did it get wrong? 15 gunfights that actually happened. Everyone documented in court records, coroner's inquests and newspapers printed within days. And in almost every case, the truth is darker than the movie version. Not more heroic, darker. Bystanders killed by lawmen's bullets, ambushes dressed up as fair fights, a teenage boy dying in his mother's arms, and exactly one documented walk-down duel of the kind Hollywood built a century on. Along the way, a wooden door so shot through, 367 holes at the lowest count, that it was carried into a courtroom as evidence, and 4 men down in 5 seconds, under a marshal who'd worn his badge for 3 days. When something is documented, I'll tell you. When it's legend, I'll tell you that too. Out here, the difference matters. Number 15. The Long Branch Saloon, Dodge City, Kansas, April the 5th, 1879. If you grew up on the TV show Gunsmoke, you know the Long Branch as Miss Kitty's place. Warm light, order restored by the final act. The real Long Branch hosted one of the ugliest killings in Dodge City's history. The myth says duels happened at a distance, with rules. Here's the record. Levi Richardson was a buffalo hunter. Frank Loving, cockeyed Frank, was a gambler, married, barely 20. Most accounts say the trouble was a woman both men wanted, and that Richardson had been loud about it for weeks. The record doesn't give us her name, it gives us what she was worth to them. On that April evening, Richardson found Loving inside the saloon, and the two opened fire while circling an iron stove. So close that witnesses said their pistols nearly touched. Richardson fired 5 shots. He missed with every one. Loving fired 6 and hit Richardson 3 times, chest, side and arm. Richardson died on the saloon floor. The coroner's jury ruled it self-defense within days. But here's what nobody mentions. Winning changed nothing. 3 years later, Frank Loving was shot dead in Trinidad, Colorado in another gunfight. Winning a duel just moved you up somebody else's list. Number 14. Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, March 9th, 1877. A gambler named Charlie Harrison stands in a frozen street, firing as fast as he can pull the trigger, shot after shot into the dark. Every one of them misses. The man across from him hasn't fired yet. That man was Jim Levy, an Irish-born Jewish gambler and one of the most feared pistol fighters on the frontier, though almost nobody remembers him today. He and Harrison had quarrelled over cards that night and taken it into the street. Harrison did exactly what the movies celebrate. He drew fast and fired fast. Levy did something colder. He took his time. He aimed. Harrison died of his wounds days later. Bat Masterson, who knew both men, later cited this fight as proof of a rule every professional understood. Deliberation beats speed. The man who takes half a second to aim kills the man who doesn't. Now the dark twist. 5 years later, in Tucson, Levy was ambushed in the street by 3 men and shot down before he could defend himself. The frontier's answer to a man you couldn't beat fairly was simple. Don't fight him fairly. Number 13, Tascosa, Texas, March 21st, 1886, 2 in the morning. You've never seen this one in a movie. Strange, because more men died here than at the OK Corral. They called it the Big Fight. The background was money, not honour. 3 years earlier, Panhandle cowboys had struck against the big ranch syndicates and lost. By 1886, Tascosa was split between men who rode for the giant LS ranch and men who'd been blacklisted. Add whiskey and a dispute over a woman, and you get 2 in the morning on Main Street. It started when LS cowboy Ed King was shot down from the shadows. No warning, no walk down. His friends came running, and the street dissolved into a close-range brawl in the dark. Minutes later, 4 men were dead. King, Frank Valley, Fred Chilton, and Jesse Sheets, a restaurant owner who'd stepped out in his nightclothes to see what the noise was, shot through the head. He wasn't part of anything. Juries acquitted the shooters. The dead went into Tascosa's Boot Hill, where you can still find them today. So why isn't this fight famous? Nobody involved had a name Hollywood could sell. Remember that. It explains a lot about number 1, number 12, Newton, Kansas, August 20th, 1871. The deadliest cowtown gunfight in Kansas history isn't Dodge City or Abilene, it's this one. And there's a reason no studio ever touched it. They called it Newton's General Massacre. 9 days earlier, a night policeman named Mike McCluskey had killed a Texan named Billy Bailey in an Election Day quarrel. The Texas Cowboys wanted blood. Just after midnight on the 20th, a cowboy named Hugh Anderson walked into Perry Tuttle's dance hall, found McCluskey at a gaming table and shot him in the neck. That should have been the end of it. Then Jim Riley stood up. Riley was about 18, dying of tuberculosis, a drifter McCluskey had taken in. Witnesses said he closed the dance hall door, drew, and emptied his revolvers into the smoke-filled room. Somewhere between 5 and 8 men were shot, a counts conflict, and several died, including men who had nothing to do with the feud. Then Jim Riley walked out into the night and vanished. No arrest, no trial, no grave anyone can point to. The deadliest shooter in Kansas cowtown history was a dying teenager, and historians still don't know what became of him. Hold that thought about stray bullets, the next one hits harder. Number 11. Abilene, Kansas, October 5th, 1871, Wild Bill Hickok's last gunfight. The myth says Hickok was the frontier's flawless marksman, cool, precise, untouchable. The record from that night is sadder. Hickok was Abilene's marshal, feuding with a Texas gambler named Phil Coe over a saloon and, depending on the account, a woman. On October 5th, Coe was drinking with a rowdy crowd when a shot rang out. Coe claimed he'd fired at a stray dog. Hickok pushed through the crowd and suddenly the two men faced each other at about 8 feet. Both fired. Coe missed. Hickok didn't. Coe went down with bullets in the stomach and died in agony 3 days later. Then it happened. Hickok caught a figure rushing toward him through the dark, gun in hand. He spun and fired twice. The man he killed was Mike Williams, his own deputy and friend running to help him. By multiple accounts, Hickok carried Williams into a saloon, laid him on a billiard table and later paid for his funeral. Here's the detail that tells you everything. Wild Bill Hickok, the most famous gunfighter alive, never fought another gunfight. Not once. 5 years later in Deadwood, he was shot from behind by a man he never saw. Number 10. Blazers Mill, New Mexico Territory, April 4th, 1878. The movies love Billy the Kid and the Regulators, young guns on the side of justice in the Lincoln County War. Here's the fight those movies rush past. Because in this one, 14 Regulators, Billy included, got taken apart by one middle-aged man eating lunch. His name was Andrew Buckshot Roberts. An old wound had ruined his shoulder, so he couldn't raise a rifle properly and fired from the hip. The Regulators, riding as deputized posse men, cornered him at a mill and trading post on the Tularosa. When he refused to surrender, the shooting started at close range. Firing from the hip, Roberts wounded several of them in seconds. Charlie Bodra shot him through the stomach, a death sentence, and Roberts kept fighting. Gut shot, he dragged himself into a doorway, grabbed a single-shot Springfield rifle and held the entire posse back. Then Dick Brewer, the Regulators' captain, raised his head from behind a woodpile over 100 yards away. Roberts, dying, propped against a mattress, put a bullet through his head. The Regulators retreated. 14 men driven off by one. Roberts died the next day, and here's the ending no screenwriter would invent. They buried him and Dick Brewer side by side, the man he killed a few feet away, forever. Number 9. Holbrook, Arizona. September 4th, 1887. The gunfight that ended a lawman's career because he won it. Sheriff Commodore Perry Owens, that was his real name, rode into Holbrook with a warrant for Andy Blevins, who went by Andy Cooper. Days earlier, in the Pleasant Valley feud, Cooper had reportedly bragged about killing 2 men. Owens found him at the Blevins family house, and he did something no movie sheriff does. He walked up alone, carrying a Winchester rifle, not a 6-gun. What happened next took under a minute. Cooper cracked the door with a pistol in hand. Owens fired through the door and mortally wounded him. John Blevins fired from a second doorway and missed. Owens shot him. A family friend named Mose Roberts came out. Accounts differ on exactly how, and Owens dropped him too. Then Sam Houston Blevins, 15 years old, grabbed his dying brother's revolver and rushed out the front door. Owens killed him on the steps. The boy died in his mother's arms. An inquest ruled every shot justified. But sit with what happened. A house full of gunmen, a rifle, and a dead 15-year-old. Within 2 years, Owens was out of office. Number 8. The Frisco Shootout, New Mexico Territory, December 1884. Remember that door with 367 bullet holes? Here it is. El Fego Becker was 19, a Mexican-American who deputized himself because nobody else would protect the Hispanic townsfolk of the Frisco plazas from rampaging cowboys. When a cowhand named Charlie McCarty shot up the town, Becker arrested him. That's it. That's the crime that started it. The cowboys' friends demanded his release, and by the next day dozens of armed cowboys, perhaps as many as 80, had Becker cornered in a tiny mud and timber shack called a jacal. The siege lasted roughly 33 hours. The attackers fired something like 4,000 rounds into that shack. The door alone, preserved and carried into a courtroom the following year, was counted at 367 bullet holes at the least. Some accounts put it past 400. Either number tells you the same thing. Becker survived because the shack's dirt floor sat below ground level, so he lay beneath the storm of lead and fired back, killing at least one attacker and wounding others. Legend adds that a plaster saint inside stood untouched through it all, and that on the second morning, the besiegers watched smoke curl from the chimney. He was cooking breakfast. At his murder trial in 1885, the defense entered that bullet-riddled door into evidence. The jury acquitted him. Becker became a lawyer, a sheriff, and a politician, and died in 1945 in his bed. Number 7. San Antonio, Texas, March 11th, 1884. Two of the deadliest gunmen in Texas walk into a theatre and get executed. Ben Thompson had been Austin's city marshal and was, by reputation, one of the finest pistol shots alive. 2 years earlier, he'd killed Jack Harris, an owner of San Antonio's vaudeville theatre, and been acquitted. Now, against all sense, he came back to that same theatre, with his friend King Fisher, a South Texas gunman with his own fearsome record. The house account said the two men started trouble upstairs and died in a fair exchange of fire. The coroner accepted it. The evidence tells another story. Thompson was hit 9 times. Fisher was hit 13, and by most accounts, Kingfisher never fired his gun at all. Later investigation pointed to hidden gunmen, associates of the house, positioned in an adjoining theatre box with rifles and shotguns, who opened fire on signal. Neither man ever had a chance. No one was ever tried for it. 2 of the most dangerous men in Texas, and the city shrugged. Because here's the truth the movies avoid. When a town decided a gunfighter needed to die, it didn't send a faster gun, it sent an ambush. Number 6. Ingalls, Oklahoma Territory. September 1st, 1893. Every western has the same ending. The marshals ride in, the outlaws fall. Ingalls is what happened when they didn't. 14 deputy US Marshals slipped into the little town of Ingalls hidden in covered wagons. Their targets, the Doolin gang, Bill Doolin, Bitter Creek Newcomb and the rest, who used the town as a sanctuary and were at that moment drinking and playing cards in Ransom's saloon. The plan fell apart in the first minute. Deputy Dick Speed shot at Newcomb, the town erupted, and from an upstairs room of the city hotel a gang member called Arkansas. Tom began firing down into the street with a rifle, methodically like a sniper. When the smoke cleared, 3 deputy marshals, Dick Speed, Tom Houston, and Leif Shadley, were dead or dying. A teenage bystander was mortally wounded, and the gang, nearly all of them, rode out and escaped. The marshals' grand ambush captured exactly one man, Arkansas, Tom, trapped in his attic. The legend says a girl called the Rose of Cimarron ran through gunfire to carry a rifle to her wounded outlaw sweetheart. Historians have never verified her, and notice what that legend is for. A love story softens a massacre. Give the town a heroine, and you can forget the marshals bleeding in the street. The 3 dead lawmen? They're in the records. The Rose isn't. The mythmakers knew which one sells. The law lost at Ingalls. It just refused to say so out loud. Number 5. Northfield, Minnesota, September 7th, 1876. For years, the skeleton of a James Gang outlaw stood in the corner of a Minnesota doctor's office. Here's how it got there. In the 7 minutes that destroyed America's most famous outlaw gang, the myth paints Jesse James as a Robin Hood. So watch what actually happened when the James Younger gang rode into a quiet farm town and walked into the First National Bank. Inside, acting cashier Joseph Lee Haywood refused to open the safe, stalling, insisting it was on a time lock. Evidence suggests the vault may not even have been fully locked. His bluff protected it anyway. For that, as the raid collapsed, one of the bandits murdered him where he stood. Outside, a Swedish immigrant named Nicholas Gustafsson, who understood almost no English and likely never grasped the shouted commands, was shot in the head. And then the town did something Hollywood never expected of civilians. Hardware merchants handed rifles and shotguns out their front doors. A medical student named Henry Wheeler fired from an upstairs window. A merchant named Anselm Manning shot from a corner, calmly, like target practice. In about 7 minutes, bandits Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell were dead in the street, and the rest were shot to pieces and running. 2 weeks later, a posse cornered the younger brothers, riddled with wounds in a slough. The gang's total haul from Northfield, $26.70, well under $1,000 in today's money. And that skeleton in the doctor's office? Henry Wheeler, the medical student at the upstairs window, ended up with Clell Miller's body for anatomical study. The outlaw he shot stood in his office for years. In the real West, ordinary citizens didn't just beat the legends, they kept the bones. Number 4, Fort Worth, Texas, February 8, 1887. The gunfight where a severed thumb decided everything. Jim Courtright, Longhair Jim, was a former Fort Worth city marshal who'd found a more profitable line of work, a detective agency that was in practice a protection racket. Saloons paid or saloons had trouble. Luke Short, a dapper little gambler who partnered in the White Elephant Saloon and counted Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp as friends, refused to pay. On the evening of February 8th, Courtright called Short out, and the two ended up face to face outside a shooting gallery. Both men reached for guns and Short was faster to fire. His first bullet, this comes from the inquest testimony, tore off Courtright's right thumb, his shooting hand's thumb, the thumb you need to cock a single-action revolver. Legend says Courtright tried the border shift, tossing his revolver to his left hand to keep fighting. If he did, he never finished it. Short fired again and again, 5 shots seconds apart. Courtright died in the doorway. Bat Masterson sat with Short in the jail that night in case a mob came. A grand jury called it self-defense, and here's the bitter twist. Fort Worth gave Courtright, the extortionist, one of the biggest funerals in its history. The gambler who stood up to him left town within 2 years. Number 3, Springfield, Missouri, July 21st, 1865. Now for something strange, the one time the movies got it basically right. Every Western showdown you've ever seen, 2 men, an open square, hands over holsters, descends from this single fight. As far as historians can document, the classic walk-down duel happened essentially once. This is it. Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt had been friends, gambling companions in post-war Springfield. Then came a quarrel over poker debts, and Tutt took Hickok's prized Waltham pocket watch as collateral. This was about face, not dollars. Tutt announced he'd wear the watch across the public square. Hickok warned him not to. On the evening of July 21st, they faced each other across that square. Not at 20 paces, but at roughly 75 yards. Tutt fired and missed. Hickok steadied his Colt Navy across his forearm, aiming, not fast drawing, and fired once. The ball went through Tutt's ribs and heart. He ran onto the courthouse porch, said something like, "Boys, I'm killed," and was. Hickok stood trial for manslaughter and was acquitted as mutual combat. 18 months later, Harper's New Monthly magazine published a wildly exaggerated profile of Hickok, inflating his kills into the hundreds, and the duel became a national template. One real walk down, retold 10,000 times, between 2 friends, over a watch. Number 2, El Paso, Texas, April 14th, 1881, 4 dead in 5 seconds. It started with 2 murdered Mexican vaqueros, young men who'd crossed the border looking for stolen cattle and were found shot dead near a ranch connected to a man named John Hale. Their bodies were brought into El Paso for an inquest, escorted by dozens of armed Mexican riders demanding justice. Constable Gus Kremkow, who spoke Spanish, translated the proceedings. That afternoon, Hale, drunk and furious at Kremkow over what he'd translated, pulled a pistol and shot the constable. Across the street stood El Paso's brand new city marshal, Dallas Staudenmeier. He had held the job for 3 days. Staudenmeier pulled his revolvers and charged, firing as he ran. His first shot missed Hale entirely and killed a Mexican bystander named Ochoa, an innocent man running for cover. His next shot found Hale's head as Hale peeked out from behind an adobe pillar. Then a former marshal named George Campbell stepped into the street, gun in hand, shouting that this wasn't his fight. And the dying Krempkow, believing Campbell was part of it, fired his last rounds into Campbell's wrist and foot. Staudenmeier turned and shot Campbell through the stomach. Roughly 5 seconds of gunfire. 4 men dead or dying, a constable, a killer, a bystander, and a man still protesting his innocence. Here's the darkness the legend skips. The first person Dallas Staudenmeier killed as a lawman was an innocent man, and the town cheered anyway. Within days, an ex-deputy tried to assassinate him with a shotgun and was shot down for it. Within 17 months, Staudenmeier himself, fired, feuding, and drinking hard, was killed in a saloon fight with the Manning brothers. El Paso's deadliest 5 seconds didn't end anything. They just started the clock on everyone involved. Number 1, Tombstone, October 26th, 1881. Time to pay off the question we opened with, because this fight explains why you've been lied to about all the others. First, the record. The fight didn't happen inside the OK Corral. It happened in a narrow vacant lot off Fremont Street beside Fly's photography studio, about 6 doors from the Corral's rear entrance. It wasn't high noon. It was close to 3 in the afternoon, cold and windy. Around 30 shots in about 30 seconds, at distances as short as 6 feet. And it wasn't white hats against black hats. It was politics. The Earps were Republican townsmen with business interests. The Clantons and McClorys were Democratic ranchers tied to the rustling economy of the Cochise County Cowboys. The fight grew out of stage robberies, stolen mules, drunken threats, and a feud everyone in town saw coming. When it started, Ike Clanton, the man whose big mouth caused most of it, was unarmed. He grabbed Wyatt Earp, screaming that he had no gun. According to Wyatt's own court testimony, he answered, "The fight has commenced. Go to fighting or get away." Ike ran and lived. Whether Tom McClory was armed at all is still disputed. No weapon was ever found on him. 30 seconds later, Billy Clanton, 19 years old, Tom McClory and Frank McClory were dead or dying. Virgil and Morgan Earp were wounded. Doc Holliday was grazed. Wyatt was untouched. A month-long hearing before Justice Wells Spicer ended without charges, but called the operation, pointedly, less than wise. Then came the part the movies turn into triumph, and the records show as tragedy. Virgil ambushed in December, his arm crippled for life. Morgan assassinated the following March, shot through a billiard room window, and Wyatt's so-called vendetta ride, a federal posse that stopped arresting people and started killing them, until Wyatt fled Arizona with murder warrants behind him. So why is this the most famous gunfight in the world? Because Wyatt Earp outlived everybody. He died in Los Angeles in 1929, with Hollywood cowboy stars among his pallbearers, after spending his last years shaping his own legend. 2 years later, a best-selling biography set the story in stone, and it named the fight after a corral where it never happened. That's the answer to our opening question. The gunfights weren't remembered because of what happened. They were remembered because of who survived to tell it. One more thing the records show, and it explains every Western you've ever loved. 15 real gunfights. One genuine walk-down duel, Springfield 1865. Nearly everything else was an ambush, a brawl, a siege, or a tragedy measured in bystanders. A restaurant owner in his nightclothes, an immigrant who couldn't understand the shouting, a deputy killed by his own friend. So where did the myth come from? Partly from the survivors, men like Wyatt Earp, who lived long enough to edit their own stories. Partly from the dime novels and the 1867 Harper's Profile that turned Hickok into a superhuman before the frontier was even closed. And partly from the censors. For decades, Hollywood's moral codes demanded fair fights and heroes who never shot first. It's why Shane waits, why the Ringo Kid gets a fair draw, why high noon happens at noon. The real West couldn't pass the code. It took until Unforgiven, a tired killer shooting an unarmed man and saying deserves got nothing to do with it, and Deadwood, which put Hickok's murder on screen the way it actually happened, from behind, for the movies to circle back to what the coroner's report said all along. The towns still sell the legend. Tombstone stages the gunfight for tourists at the corral where it didn't happen, but the truth survives in the inquests and court transcripts, and the darkest record of all, what Wyatt Earp did when he stopped enforcing the law and started avenging his brothers, That story is on screen right now. 15 gunfights, one pattern. The real West wasn't a fair fight. It was fast, close, drunken, political, and paid for by bystanders. The Vendetta ride is on screen now. If tonight's ride through the records was worth your time, consider subscribing.